Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our first item is bring on.
I'm an item now.
You are.
Good evening, I'm Brianna Murray for Thomas Iowa Governmental Affairs. Your contract lobbyist is your voice, I am your down in India. I'm here this evening to provide you with an end of session report. I'll start with apologies that I do not have all written up for you and hand out like I usually do. So you'll just have to listen carefully. So my apologies. Overall, I think the 2016 legislative session was successful for you all. Your top priority was to adjust the phasing of the Bay Street pedestrian path and to move $500,000 of the $3.5 million provided in the Connecting Washington package up to this year. We were successful in making that change happen. The remaining of the funding doesn't start until 2019. So as I understand it, you'll move forward with doing this next $500,000 phase, and then we'll revisit in 2019 the remaining funding amount needed and evaluate next steps moving forward at that time. So overall, very successful. You got what you needed. Now, what about everything else? It was, I think going into the session, we heard from legislators that it was going to be a short session. They were going to come into town, take care of business, make tweaks to the budget, and then get out of town. Absolutely no special sessions. They were wrong. They struggled to reach an agreement on the operating budget in particular, which then connects to the capital budget. So we just go into a special session. When they went into a special session, there was some politics played. The governor vetoed 27 different bills and said, hey guys, come back to town and get to work, or I'm going to continue to veto these bills. So they did. They eventually reached an agreement. They overrode all of the governor's vetoes, and they got out of town. The big item that hung them up on negotiations was around clearing, and was around how to balance their budget so it fits in the four-year budget outlook. A couple years ago, the legislature adopted a new policy that rather than just making their budget balance over 2 years, they have to make their budget balance over 4 years, even though revenue projections change a lot in those out years. It required them to take a little bit closer look at a number of accounts and what I would describe as doing some budget magic in order to make it all balance over the 4-year period.
Budget magic, is that like smoke and mirrors?
You said it, not me. See, budget magic can be good or bad, is what she said. So on the education front, they adopted a plan to come up with a plan by the beginning of the 2017 session. They created a task force, and that task force is going to be meeting. They've already held 2 meetings. They'll be meeting on a bi-weekly basis until the 2017 session. They're going to be looking at property tax levy swap, local school teacher salaries, and what the exact amount of money is needed in order to satisfy the Clery Supreme Court, because that amount is debated. It's $3 billion to $5 billion, and differing regional lines differ. So on the education front, they adopted a plan to do a plan. By 2018, the court is going to review that plan and determine whether it's sufficient. We expect that to happen in the next few months. If the court finds that it is insufficient, the court could choose to either increase sanctions on the state or call them back in for a special session or void their budgets, or there's a number of different things that could potentially happen. So stay tuned. Specific to more city-oriented priorities within the budget, I would say that in balancing their budget to meet this new 4-year outlook, they had to look for small amounts of money in places think this is writing on the wall for what we can expect to see in 2017. Some examples of what they proposed, none of these were in the final budget, but examples of what they proposed was they eliminated the $2.5 million that goes for the operations of MRSC, the Municipal Research Services Center. They proposed changing the reimbursement formula for the Basic Law Enforcement Academy so that cities would pay a larger portion percentage of the cost of each training cadet. So if you hired a new officer, you send them on to training, you would be responsible for one of their costs. There was a proposal to sweep all of the fire insurance premium tax revenues that are received by 44 cities. You are not one of the 44 cities impacted by that, but I think it's notable that once again they're turning to cities to try and balance their budget. And then they swept the Public Works Assistance account and indicated an intent to have that sweep continue through to 2019. Now the governor vetoed the portion that indicated the intent going forward into the future biennium, so that did not make it into law, but the other sweep did. The reason I say this is all writing on the wall is because as we look into the 2017 session, they're going to have to fund K-12 education, and the way they've been balancing their budget is through our programs and proposals for cuts to our programs. I think this was a huge red flag that come 2017, every single piece of state share revenue that the cities receive is probably on the chopping block. And we went through this before, through the recession, and we saw liquor taxes be reduced. Also heard proposals that they might increase their administrative percentage that they take when they collect our sales tax. So the state collects all your sales tax revenues and remitts it back to you. And when they do that, they take an administrative fee. They might increase the percentage of that administrative fee to help balance their budget. So, aren't you glad I was the first thing on the agenda? Start off on a cheery note. While I think the 2017 session is going to be challenging, and we see those red flags, I also think that it is going to be ripe with opportunity. And here's how. One, I think that we're going to need to start educating legislators now to play very good defense. But we've been fairly successful at playing defense, and the fact that none of those cuts were included in the final budget is an indicator of that. The second is that when they make more investments in education, the operating budget is going to get larger. And when the operating budget gets larger, by virtue the capital budget gets larger, which means there's a great deal of opportunity for the city to request funds for projects like the Call Pair or park funding or other city facility funding. That presents a great opportunity. There's going to be a desire amongst the legislators to fund those types of projects, especially if they're going to be making cuts in other areas. And then on the transportation front, we will be a full biennium away from when the transportation revenue package was initially adopted. And I think by having a full biennium, whereas last year there was this no, don't make any changes, leave it the way it was, there's going to be more of an open door to making tweaks, adjustments, changes to funding levels, project descriptions, maybe even the project list. So if we needed to go in and ask for additional funding for a project like Tremont, that might be a possibility. So I see there being a lot of opportunity in 2017 in addition to a lot of challenges.
Graham, do you think that with their attack on cities' revenues, that there might be an opportunity to adjust some of the unfunded requirements that come to the cities?
Do you have a specific one in mind?
No, not anything in particular, but I'm just thinking that instead of just bringing our hands to the wall as me, coming in with something that would help and truly have a benefit to the city.
So we've been working on a proposal to reform the Burger Act to address some of the unfunded costs associated around that
That's
act.
an example.
And year after year, as you all have legislators that have strong feelings around transparency. This interim, there's going to be a bipartisan outreach by Representative Joe McBride and Representative Terry Neely, so a House Democrat, House Republican, to bring all those stakeholders together to see if they can come to an agreement and hammer out a deal for this upcoming session. I think that if they're able to come up with a true deal where all the parties are comfortable, that there's a possibility for something to move forward, but I don't see anything otherwise unique that would change the outcome of what we've been doing in previous years.
Yeah, I appreciate that stormwater is something that's coming from higher ups, but maybe there's an opportunity to adjust some of the deadlines and some of the things that come with stormwater that might give us some breathing room before we have to.
Around the NPDES permits.
Yeah, I mean, those are just a couple of things that come to mind, but I'm mainly thinking of ways to help reduce the demand for revenue in cities if we're not going to get the revenue.
I think, and I am open ears for all those ideas. You know, we heard from legislators probably 3 or 4 years ago. What are your cost drivers? What can we do to help address those cost drivers? And a number of different proposals have been brought forward, from collective bargaining to changing GMA requirements, public records. Now, the challenging thing with all of those is that they face this strong opposition from other stakeholders, so we haven't made any progress on any of those.
But if we reduce the amount of money that comes out of the citations that our police department writes and our municipal courts deal with, reduce the percentage that goes to the state and let us keep a little more of that for something. I mean, it's just it's a different way of approaching these issues.
Yeah, I think if you've got
Mayor,
creative
maybe-
ideas, we should sit down and chat.
Well, I was just going to say, maybe you could collectively sit down with your staff and come up with suggestions that might help reduce the overhead. Start throwing stuff on the wall, see if anything sticks.
Another thing that I would just, the Kitsap Regional Coordinating Council is starting to put together their legislative agenda. And we're hoping to have a meeting with the legislators from the 23rd, 26th, and 35th on November 10th. So anything that we do here, we want to make sure gets on that agenda also. When we're talking, not the specific, not our funding needs, but the public records ask and some of the other things.
I guess the next one, kind of along those lines, is the timing of all this stuff with certainly the number of folks in our legislature and folks that are up for re-election, and what's the best timing for approaching it? Is it before the election, after the election?
So my recommendation to you all in the past has been to have a finalized legislative agenda by the end of October. So immediately following the election, you can sit down and present them with your formal legislative agenda. However, in addition to your legislative agenda, I also encourage you to have an interim work plan that is for me, and really that's a less formal document. It's more an understanding of all of us that over the interim, Brianna, these are the things we want you to be working on and talking about. The direction that I have from you based on your 2016 adopted document is Tremont funding. My thinking on that is that Mark has done just an excellent job in finding some revenue through PSRC. We've been working together in communicating with TIB, and we'll continue to work on that. Whatever your unfunded amount is would then be your Tremont ask going into 2017. Now, all of the reservations and obstacles we've run into in the past in securing funding for Tremont at the state level still remain. So we're making the ask because that's the amount you need. It's the last dollars in the door. It's our last run at it. But we're going to continue to hear from the legislature. It's not a state route that they're responsible for funding, that it's not relieving congestion in their opinion, on a state route.
So they don't necessarily feel like it's a priority for state funding. But my recommendation is that you've got some money, the state can be the last dollar in the door, and so we make the request.
Following up on your comment, we've got an opportunity to get our hand out and to thank the DeKalb Pier. And what are we
Yes.
looking at
Yep.
for a completion date there, Mark? July, late July, August?
I'd say we're going to be starting in June 15th. Yeah, I'd say safely, end of August, first part of September.
So we'll have an opportunity to have a ribbon cutting, have a number of council members there, and to be sure to thank our delegation, because that's how that happened, and plant those seeds as far as Tremont, capital needs for parks, potentially City Hall.
When you look at the legislative biennium, you all have, as a city, have been very successful. The $3.5 million for Bay Street pedestrian path, the funding for DeKalb Pier, moving up the funding for Bay Street pedestrian path. And I think a huge part of that success continuing is thanking your legislators.
Another thing that came to mind about our expense of the city, and I appreciate we're attacking the state's revenues, but our DNR fees might be something that we should take a look at and see if there's a way that we can reduce that.
Particularly if we cut some of it up, take it apart.
Yeah. And then I appreciate that this is state, but mentioning the election, Senator Murray is up for re-election. It might be nice to include her in invitations, just a reminder that Port Orchard is in their district. So, thank her for remembering us somewhere along the line.
I think we all owe Brianna, very much thank you. I mean, she has done a phenomenal job for us, from accelerating the $500,000 to getting us to $3.5 million. She's been an integral part of it. So
To my knowledge, I think
team
we're the
effort.
only city that got some funding accelerated out of the transportation package.
It was rare, yes.
We should really thank you.
It's a team effort. You have some great city staff that give me information in a timely manner and always answer my phone calls no matter the time of day. And you have a great legislative delegation that's ready to advocate on your behalf. So, as I was saying, I'll focus on Tremont funding. I'll continue to participate in the West Sound Alliance regarding regional priorities. I think that group is reconstituting, re-meeting, and restarting their work this interim later this month. And then we can identify, I'm excited at the idea of finding some new creative ways of saving money. I'd encourage us not to continue to bang our head against the wall on things that we know aren't going to pass, but if there's some creative things we can come up with.
What do you think the risk is of losing MSRC?
I think that it would likely go entirely to a subscription-based service, and it would come out of your general fund.
And I was working with Joe Van, who's their kind of chief legal, head of their legal department, sorry, because the legislatures in another jurisdiction I represent were kind of integral in hopefully trying to get that money secured for another year. And I do know that MRC is active in looking for alternative funding sources, and absolutely I agree with Brianna that it would probably be some subscription-based model that's more sustainable over time, because they've had the legislator jerk them around before with funding throughout their history, which is unfortunate because it's such a small amount for such a significant service. But
I think there's really two messages that I think cities need to communicate around that program. One is that so much of the research that is done there, and you're the attorney, you can tell me I'm wrong, it is really legal work that saves cities money from having to each separately pay city attorneys to do that work. That MRSC provides a lot of legal analysis that inevitably saves you a lot of money. And then the second thing is the amount that it's used. That was something we heard from a number of different legislators, which is, well, really, how often do people go to this website? So if you are a frequent user of MRSC, start keeping track of exactly how many times you go to their website. Once a week, twice a week. I know I use it a lot, probably on a daily basis, but this is also my line of work, so.
It's more than just cities that go to MSRC,
Right,
they're
cities,
county and.
counties, special purpose districts, legislative staff.
I know they've been doing kind of reaching out to a lot of different organizations to get them to join in, if you will. So
Right.
maybe that's in an attempt to build up their base, so if they do go to a subscription system, they have more people that can contribute.
Yeah, I mean, I think again the message I got from this last legislative session is the fact that so many cuts to city programs were proposed, and that the amount of money it generated for the state was so minimal, $2.5 million in an over $36 billion budget. Like, why pick on MRSC? You've got to have somewhere else to pick on, right? And it comes down to this new 4-year budget outlook, where they need to just make some small tweaks here and there so that they can fit in that 4-year forecast.
How about the fines that are being paid? That's also a drop in the bucket, the 100,000 per day. Is it?
Yeah, the legislature actually chose not to appropriate the funds to pay those fines.
We can't, they can't.
I think there is an ongoing tension between what's the responsibility of the legislature and what's the responsibility of the judicial branch.
So Brianna, very quickly, John mentioned, these kind of unfunded mandate. And I know this is an impossible ask, but it just seems, given the fact that the legislature is still, or the state is still trying this common law versus vested doctrine, that it's kind of up in the air, and the legislature put us there.
Are you proposing to tackle vesting?
No, what I'm proposing is that we should try to at least, so we have this deadline on the LID codes, but the reality of it is that a lot of this code, once this decision is made, is going to make us potentially go back and make some adjustments, right? I mean, it just seems like they should delay our LID mandate code rewrites until this case is settled. So I know that's a complete uphill battle.
Well,
that's
unfortunately,
the
they're
issue.
not back in session before the updates are due, so that's the unfortunate part. with
But you
that.
could start.
Those are the kinds of things that consume staff time, that diverts our attention from being able to do some of the things we need to do locally, if you will. So,
Because we're going to make code and then redo the code. Because
any one of those kinds of things. I'm just thinking, I know on a federal level, well, even on the state level, I know transits have been attacking some of the permitting requirements that we're obligated to do on some of our capital projects, and some of the other things that the state requires, that it's just kind of, in our opinion, is a make work type of thing, but they like it. It just costs more money. There might be some things in the bidding structure that could be modified that could help us streamline some of those processes as well. So,
Yeah, it would be nice. Private sector is very efficient in those sorts of things. It's like Star Trek, make it so, and it just happens. Here, it's
Well,
like
I
2
know
years
it-
later, you're still like, okay, are we getting there?
yeah, I feel your frustration. I have no patience when it comes to that stuff, and you just have to deal with it.
So the feedback I'm getting from you all is to come back to you all with some ideas on how to save money. Some different policy ideas.
Well, and I think we need to do some of that internally, just look at what
Right.
our processes
Yep,
are.
we'd all work together.
like it's notes here.
And then focusing on Tremont, and then go to ribbon cutting. With the idea of this, your legislative agenda being final by the end of October, when would you all like for me to bring a recommended legislative agenda to you all? August?
Yeah.
Okay.
Aren't you gonna cancel that meeting?
Yeah, we are. We're not gonna-
September?
September.
September, I guess it is.
Yeah.
And you and I should probably meet in August.
Okay. You won't cancel?
We just aren't gonna have an evening meet work study
Okay.
in August.
Okay, great.
Thanks for pointing that out, Nick.
Yeah.
Brandon was gonna.
I was going to mention one other thing too, and that was the magic 25,000 threshold per population, where we're potentially not going to be less likely to annex areas because we do not want to pass that threshold and take over state highways. So that's a small thing.
Perfect, perfect example.
But that's a great example.
Those are easy things that they could probably do and could help us.
Yeah.
So that means the state would continue to be responsible for highways longer, which will cost the state money.
Yes.
Not any more than that. It's just
Not any more right than they're paying right now.
Well, yes
I was
and
going to say,
no.
they're currently responsible, it's just a matter of when they shift it over to us locally and just delay that a while.
Right, so
That's
you would
budget
change
management.
to 25.
30 or 35,000.
Well,
Well,
remember, there's a dichotomy that Kilmer and I had argued successfully from 166, and that is RCW 4724 have the 22,000 and then the 25 population is when a city fully takes ownership of the highway. But there's a RCW 3513, I think, that says, it contradicts that. It says, if a city grows into its UGA and there's a right-of-way through it, that right-of-way does not then slip under the 4724, which is a complete contradiction. So it basically says if you had a highway, let's say Sedgwick or 160, so right now the easterly city limits at Fred Meyer. Under 3513, if we then annex to Jackson, but we were still under that, or we were, even if we were with the 25, that they wouldn't take up that piece of highway. That's what happened with Whittier on 166, is we would end up having this strip of highway that's part of the state highway system, but under our jurisdiction because of 3513, because of the way that's written. So take a look at that.
Okay.
It contradicts itself.
Okay. So I got a couple different ideas. You guys can come up with more.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Sorry, like I said, sorry I didn't have a written one-page report like I usually do.
But you delivered. You got the money.
So I'm off the hook?
You're off
Is
the
that the
hook.
deal?
For now.
Yeah.
Okay, we on to the comp plan.
Okay. Thank you all.
Is Carrie gonna, Carrie gonna come take the hot
you
seat?
guys want to come join us up here, maybe bring one.
Oh, that's Clancy's, wrong one, it had a D.
Does everybody know
Oh,
Carrie and Thomas? Any of your committee?
yeah, you're the guy.
The long range planner. This is Thomas Hunter, our new public works superintendent, right? Foreman. He wrote the
And water system.
water system, and he wrote the fabulous lead memo that we all read. So, and he must have went to a funeral or a wedding or something this evening. Never seen a sports coat. Trying to make you look bad. All right, let's talk about the comp plan.
All right, so we distributed the most recent draft comp plan in your binders that you should all have now a couple of weeks ago, and we are nearing our adoption deadline of June 30th. Right now, we are on track for a public hearing at the next council meeting, or the first council meeting in June, on June 14th. We've submitted the plan to Commerce for review. SEPA, I believe the comment period ends on Friday? Or it just ended? Okay. The appeal period maybe ends on Friday. Anyway, SEPA is complete. The Planning Commission held its last public hearing on the entire document at its last meeting and unanimously voted to recommend approval. They did that on a caveat. We got a last-minute comment from Fish and Wildlife, and they said, please incorporate the requests that the Department of Fish and Wildlife has made. And so we've made those revisions in the draft that you have, which were pretty minor. And then we did just receive a comment from the Squamish tribe earlier this week, and so we are working to make a couple of minor revisions to address their concerns as well. And so I think we're at the point where we wanted to just present the document to you and see what questions you had, or to have a discussion concerning the document. And I did include in my memo just an outline of the steps that we've taken from when this project started to where we are now, which it began back in March of 2014. And I counted nine meetings where we directly took public testimony or reached out to the public to get their input, either through surveys, open houses, public hearings. But there were 25 meetings between the Planning Commission, your committees, and the City Council where we've discussed the comprehensive plan update. So this has been, I think, in the public eye for quite a while, and maybe that's why towards the end of this, people weren't commenting at the public hearings or showing up, because this had been pretty thoroughly vetted. We did have one meeting where a lot of people showed up concerning Paul Powers Park, but I think we resolved that to everybody's satisfaction. And so other than the two written comments we received from Fish and Wildlife and the tribe, there aren't many outstanding issues. The elements of the comprehensive plan, as you remember, the University of Washington students helped us with the introduction, land use, and housing elements. And in the land use plan, unlike the county, we're not proposing to change the land use designations. Everything is staying the same. We did take the centers, our desire to create sub-area plans for each of our local centers. We more formally described that in the new land use element, and most of the text in those elements is entirely new. Some of the goals and policies were carried forward. And so that was the first step that was completed, and then we moved on to the other elements. We hired consultants to do the utilities and transportation elements, and Thomas helped put together the final utilities element, which is really pulling a lot of key overarching points from those plans that were developed by our consultants and putting them into a very succinct utilities element, just generally describing our utility systems. Our transportation element is probably the biggest change from our previous plan to this new plan, and it really ties into our traffic impact fee ordinance that we adopted in the traffic impact fee study, and also our concurrency standards. And I know, and Victor has impeccable timing because he was the primary author of the transportation element, and you can pull up a chair if you'd like. And so Victor came to the Planning Commission and gave a presentation concerning the transportation element, but I think the big change here is that we now have a transportation element that is totally in compliance with state law in terms of the projects that we've identified that are needed to maintain our current levels of service. And also, now that we have a transportation model, we've really clearly identified what road projects are needed to maintain those levels of service, and we're able to evaluate applications as they come in under our development regulations to figure out how they impact our city. And we've also adopted a non-motorized element, including non-motorized level of service standards, which are going to allow us to more concretely figure out what mitigation is required for a project in terms of building sidewalks and non-motorized facilities as part of transportation improvements. And I think I don't know if, maybe I'll give Victor a few minutes to catch his breath from running up the stairs. But the other elements that we worked on, economic development was the first one that we tackled, and we worked pretty closely with the Economic Development Committee, and that was drafted in-house, and we vetted it through the Department of Health, KEDA, and several other organizations in the community, and really worked to refine that directly with council members at that committee level, and then brought it to the Planning Commission. And then the natural systems element, really, there wasn't a whole lot of change to that one overall. And capital facilities is is actually much shorter than it had been previously. I think there was a whole lot of additional information that wasn't required in that element in the previous plan, and so we tried to make the plan shorter, but Victor made the transportation element longer, and so I think it's on a whole it's a little bit shorter. And also, I guess the other thing that we need to mention is that, you know, the real driver of what's found in the comprehensive plan are these population and employment allocations through KRCC. And so I guess the good news, and we've reported this to you previously, is that we have adequate capacity for residential and employment, residential population and employment growth. We are growing at the right pace to meet our targets so that we're not going to exceed them too soon and have to take reasonable measures to slow down our rate of growth. And so that really worked out well because it didn't require a whole lot of radical changes in terms of land use patterns or zoning or other development regulations. And that was helpful. And then those allocations fed into all of these elements, especially transportation and utilities, as we planned what improvements are going to be needed for each system. And so I think I'll let Victor talk about transportation a little bit, and then maybe Thomas can talk about utilities and just some of the capital projects that are in our utilities element.
You already did a great job of covering it. I think a couple of main points is that the capital facilities plan for transportation that we did identify is very similar to the one that's currently in your impact fee. So especially for the near-term 6-year window, it's the same transportation improvement program that we shared with Mark as he's updating your new plan. We did, on the long range, identify a few minor improvements, some intersection improvements that you might want to consider adding to the impact fee program as we approach the future. And then also we identified some improvements necessary on the county facilities immediately adjacent to the city. And our model, we made it extend out into the county enough so that we could anticipate what might be necessary where city roads interface with county roads. And those projects we've shared with staff, and Mark has shared them with Kitsap County to try to get them to prioritize them in their capital facilities plan and their transportation improvement plan. As Nick said, the same population and employment forecasts in the land use element were carried over to the transportation element. That's one of the key things that PSRC looks at for that internal consistency. On the level of service standards, we added a new measurement. Your previous comp plan really just looked at intersections, and it correctly identified the roadways between the intersections that needed improvements. But we developed a little more sophisticated method that looks at traffic volumes and functional classification of the roadway, and then the presence or absence of some of those non-motorized facilities like bicycle lanes and sidewalks, and actually restricts the capacity of a roadway, not just based on the number of lanes the roadway has, but if those other features are present or not, because we wouldn't want 1,000 cars a day on a travel lane that has no shoulder versus we wouldn't mind 1,000 cars, sorry, not a day, an hour, 1,000 an hour on a major arterial. You'd want to have a sidewalk and a bike lane if it's on a bike route, or a separated bicycle facility if you're going to allow that much traffic. And so we generated that in basically an Excel formula, and we can export the volume data from the travel demand model, and then we compare it to the condition of the roadway. And fortunately, it identified the same failing segments again that were in your current CIP. So, you know, most transportation engineers can kind of figure that out, but now you have a formula that, as Nick said, as development occurs, if you get a spike of development in one area, it would help us reprioritize a roadway improvement to respond to that. Anything, and then the reviews that we are currently doing, we've done several development reviews using this procedure already, and I think we've done a good job of identifying, you know, the near-term mitigations of those projects we need, and your models being updated every time a development proposal is submitted. We're putting that into your travel demand model, so we have now a running forecast, so we can tell you if the permanent developments in your system get built, you know, here's that new kind of 3 to 5 year look at future traffic, so Mark can use that in future 6-year TIP planning. We kind of have now a 6-year forecast instead of only having existing and 20 years. It doesn't help you in terms of what to do next year. So now we have a tool that helps you decide what to do next year, what do you do the year after.
And we have concurrency.
Yeah.
We've never had concurrency before.
Yeah.
So we haven't had to say no, this one doesn't meet concurrency, and concurrency allows for a 6-year window, so that's why the 6-year TIP that Mark develops every year is very important. Those are the projects that we assume are going to be there by 6 years. And so when we test a development, we assume that they're there. If it still fails, then that's when we get into the negotiation of whether we can accelerate a project, whether they can phase their project to when that capital facility is there, or if they want to, upfront the cost of that particular improvement.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very important that as we're going to still approve a 6-year plan, 6-year street plan every year, it's going to be very important that we do not start pushing projects back off of that 6-year time frame if we work under the assumption that those projects are moving forward. So that plan, you're going to want to be more cautious about moving projects into the 6-year window, and once they're there, you're going to want to commit to building them in order to make sure that we don't have problems down the road, either related to project approvals or just traffic deficiencies.
I do need to schedule time to go over the amendment to 1722 based on some revisions I've made. So maybe I'll forward it to you and we can talk about it in the next couple of days.
So I think we can, are there any questions about the transportation portion of the plan? Okay, I'll let Thomas present.
I just said it's daunting.
I think it's probably a third of our plan is transportation. So I'll let Thomas speak to the utilities element, and I just want to say I'm really happy with how it turned out because it's very concise and easy to read. And I think this is something that the public can actually look at and learn something about our system without getting bogged down in details. So hopefully that's.
Well, the first thing that I'll say is I really appreciated the help from Nick and Carrie in working with them on the comp plan. I think they've done an excellent job. It's easy when you get to work with people that make it easy, so very appreciative of that. The water and sewer comp plan really hinges around the CIP. I mean, that's really the main bulk and the crux of what's going on here. One of the important things to note is on the water, because it's a little bit more unique than sewer. We actually had our consultant go through and help us identify who was going to pay for what and how it was going to be funded, so that we could be a little bit more calculated about the funds that are appropriated for those projects. It's very easy, I think, to put together a 6-year CIP and say these are the projects that we want to get done, these are the things that are forecasted. It's that next layer of projecting how they're going to get funded that really makes things happen. So I think that's really a big key for the water side. Both the water and the sewer CIP are what I would call a blend of things that are very necessary for the city to fix because the infrastructure is aging, as well as being very cognizant of not fixing something to a standard that'll meet 2025 projections, but beyond that. So sizing mains for future capacity and connecting different zones. There was a lot of forward thinking and a lot of questions asked from a modeling perspective to make sure that the improvements that are outlined there not only look at specific areas, but also the 50,000 foot level. And when you're trying to make improvements to the system, I think that's very important. And really, I think as far as I'm concerned, I can talk water and sewer all day. So it's more if you guys have specific questions about the CIP or different infrastructure things, I'd be more than happy to answer any of those.
I think it's important to remind everybody also that for the water and the sewer, even though in 2015 we had all our comprehensive plan updates, the beachhead of this whole initiative for the utilities was really born in 2013 and 14 when we hired Katie Isaacson to do our gap analysis, because it was in the review. So the gap analysis had these consultants at the beginning of their task reevaluating not only the CIP lists themselves, but also the timing of those, and saying, okay, we're going to not do what the city's done historically in the past with a non-constrained plan, where we just keep moving a project down. Oh, we didn't do it this year, we'll do it next year. Really looked at that, as you remember, as part of the gap analysis to come up with a rate. So what we have really right now is constrained plan with CIP estimates and schedules that are consistent for rates and the revenue that are coming in. And that, that's a huge check of, we're becoming a big city now, and it's like, okay, we're there now. We're actually acting like a big city, and the concurrency is a big part of that now, where we actually, instead of just sending a letter out and saying, yeah, there's water, well, we really don't know if there is. We can say, no, definitively our model says, because we have a sewer model now, we have a water model and a transportation model, and we've never had that. So this has been a good 2 years, and I think I mentioned last year that really 2015 was a paradigm for the city in a lot of different areas. And as Victor will talk later on about ADA and the pavement management systems, we're kind of continuing that growth into
I mean, we had some uncomfortable decisions we had to make in December of last year when we, accepted those plans and increased those rates, but it's so that we can, afford to pay for these plans.
I just want to echo what Nick had said. When I read the utilities chapter, I learned a lot. And it made sense, and I think all the work we had done with Katie at Isaac Center helped that too. And we all know that I read this stuff. Carrie's gonna look at herself. I didn't roll my eyes. But in the utilities area, and so this could be that we service something other than our actual population. But we say the city's current service area is approximately 2,100 acres with a population of 11,500. So is our population for utilities different than the city population? Yes.
West Sound.
Because West Sound, and that's what I had read in here, because West Sound does do some of the
And
servicing. Yeah, Bremerton, okay.
In Bremerton, you still have wells out there, there's still a lot of that going on. And when we looked at the way that we calculate these projections, they're done off of sub-basins. So everything's very small, and then you zoom out based off those cells. Because when you project over a large population, you'll miss the details. So we do the sub-basins really small, and then we scope out so that we're kind of encapsulating everything. And that's the way that they project those out. So when they model the flows, when they model, we do water quality modeling, we look at the age of water. These improvements in the water system really start to take the water quality modeling piece, and we're looking at the age of the water before it hits your faucet. How can we improve that transmission and get that water to you quicker so it's of higher quality? Those are the sort of thought processes in the modeling that go behind this 6-year CIP, and I think that combining that with having the funding source and the schedule is what's going to be so important in getting these projects done. It's one thing to have the schedule, it's another thing to have the money and the ability to complete it. So.
And I want to thank Carrie too for her work on this. I think she really helped get the project over the finish line because it was a huge amount of work just to compile all of this and put it together. But I don't know if you have anything you want to add to natural systems or economic development or any of the other areas that maybe we missed.
Natural systems, just to say that I did actually touch base again today with Fish and Wildlife and with Allison of the Tribe and talked about the draft changes that we were making to that section, and they both said they were pleased. And so we shouldn't have any other issues from them. We also have incorporated comments that we received previously from WashDOT and from PSRC. So
thank you for reminding me of that.
We came into the first of the year a little behind the plan here, and this has been priority number one over the planning department. And Carrie started, this has been her baby since she got here. This is really all she's done, and she's to be commended for it.
Yeah, and I would compliment her in Nick's department because it reads better than it did originally, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I'd also like to add just, where we go from here, we did add an Appendix A, which is implementation, and we've sort of prioritized some of the next steps that are pulled out of the document, and especially related to our centers of local importance, which that discussion is going to take place at the KRCC in coming years about having criteria for local centers. But we really want to get moving on developing sub-area plans that are going to connect transportation to land use and design so that we will potentially bring you an annual amendment that adopts a sub-area plan for a particular part of town that incorporates the comp plan designations with the zoning and the transportation infrastructure. And that's going to be a really important next step. And I think we're going to probably start on the Sedgwick, Sydney, and Sedgwick Bethel areas. And then it sounds like McCormick Woods may help with kicking some of that off with private funding, because they would like to look at their plans for the McCormick North area, which is their village. And, so hopefully we'll see that start moving in the coming years. Other than that, if anybody shows up and says that they didn't have an opportunity to comment, hopefully, I think we have done a pretty good job of making this available to the public, and hopefully nobody comes on the 14th with something new that they haven't brought forward previously.
So, go ahead. I just had a question for Carrie. Nick, while it's still fresh in your mind, have you thought of creating a quiz that we could add with it and just see the people for each section, like maybe 5 questions per?
I don't know that I want to give you guys ammunition against
Sort of a comprehension of your comprehensive plan exam.
We'll consider that.
So I had some comments and questions as well. And the first thing I want to talk about was reasonable measures. And you mentioned that we're proceeding with our growth as we would like to. But I think it would be worthwhile to take a look at reasonable measures and see what sort of policy implications there might be from examining institution of reasonable measures, perhaps as a policy matter this fall or something. And the reason for that is that allows us to get ahead of the growth so that we anticipate growth without then having to expand our UGAs.
Yeah.
So that's another discussion for another time. But I also would like to tell staff that I think they did a great job with the document that I know is very difficult to pull off in a short time. It's disappointing that we didn't have more public involvement, and I know you guys struggled with how to get that, and you did everything you could to get that. And then I know that the meat of this document begins with Appendix A, and so I had some questions about that. The priority level, does that begin with staff's recommendation to the Planning Commission, and then this then reflects their recommendation?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
So if council wishes to change any of that, I mean, we can certainly.
Well, I think that's where some robust discussion could occur. I know I've made some comments about some suggested priorities. I think one thing that would help just before this document is published is maybe if there were page numbers associated with the goals, so that you could go to the goals and see the policies associated with those. But I think that where we need to have our next discussion, and I'll just caveat that by saying, we could adopt this, tomorrow and look at reprioritizing this the next day. So it's not that this is so important, but it is important to have agreement as we move through, particularly with budget issues and so on. So I'd like to see that we set some time aside and talk about the priority of our various goals.
So is this ahead of, you think, next year's budget, or is this a retreat topic?
I think it's a great retreat topic. It's kind of what I was
next
thinking.
retreat,
Yeah.
which probably isn't until February of next year.
So do you want to do that prior to the budget process?
Yeah.
This is some fall.
Right, exactly, that's what I was thinking. I mean, if we're happy with this and nobody has any serious bones about the prioritization, then we could adopt it as is, but then I think we ought to turn around and begin to look at what really are our priorities.
Yeah. And I think what you said about reasonable measures too, I would like to comment on that. And as we do these sub-area plans, I'm sure that we're slowly going to identify additional capacities that can be added to the city that will help deal with that next allocation, but those things may not get adopted into our code until the next,
Right.
towards the next update. But
Yeah, growth is coming, and if we can contain it, we're making the state happy and we're helping our own budget needs.
How are our work studies looking? I mean, is this a work study? If we're wanting to prioritize this prior to the budget process, I think it really needs to be part of a future work study. Is it realistic? Is it next month? What are the next couple months?
June is getting full, but July probably has some.
So maybe we bring this back in July?
Either July or September, but I think once you get into September, it's budget.
We're in the budget, so this needs to be July's work study.
So hearing that, we would adopt this as it is and then reprioritize it if we need to.
Ahead of the budget, so
Right.
that, so that we know where we're allocating funds to in the budget process.
Right, and I think I would encourage people to go through it and look at, are there any serious is there anything that's high that should be low or anything low that should be high? And we can always propose that as a motion for the adoption of the plan. But after that, I think we really need to spend some time on this.
And one of the things that occurred this year because of the way our code was structured is that our annual comp plan amendment process begins in June and is supposed to end at the end of the year. But we're only allowed to amend the code or the comp plan once a year unless it's an emergency or capital budget decision. And so there's no opportunity for amendments this year, but we're looking at changing the code so that process will be January through June rather than June through December. And that way the comp plan can be done during the first half of the year, and then that can influence the budget in the second half of the year. So if you come up with a new list for priorities, we can bring that forward as a 2017 amendment.
Right. And in spite of GMA, essentially, with that once annual adoption, we could still work off our own list.
Yeah, and low, medium, and high are not necessarily binding.
Right.
Other comments?
Good job.
So I'm hearing you all say it's ready to go on the 14th.
Let's kick it off.
Right, exactly. Let's move on to the next item, which is ADA transition plan and pavement management system. So thank you guys. You can hang out if you want. Victor's just getting going. Victor, or Mark, are you going to open this, or Victor?
I guess I'll open it. So as you know, after years of trying, we finally got in the budget both the ADA transition plan and the pavement management system. More of the pavement management system is kicked down the road. In the ADA transition plan, we had initially, at the end of 2015, I thought we were going to be doing a countywide cooperative through KRCC, and that didn't come to fruition. So at this point, I received today proposals from our selected consultants that I'll be bringing forth on March 24th for both the pavement management system and the ADA transition plan. It worked out through, not through anything intentional. It worked out through looking at going out for qualifications on both projects that TSI and IMS,
Infrastructure Management Services.
Yeah, services were smart enough to collaborate to give us the most efficient project. And that being that IMS is out of Arizona, and most of the pavement management system firms were Nevada, California. And Victor was able to reach out, and basically they proposed as a prime or a sub on either project. And the benefit to the city is that as we're going down the road doing the pavement management system, micro paver, special van, magic bus, picking up information, we don't have blinders on. It's just picking up that information. We're also doing the ADA transition plan work. And so I think given that, other than in the proposals, there's some base bids that meet our budgets. And then there's some additional tasks that I think at this point we'll probably get moving along, and then as we go, we'll decide if we want to issue a change order to pick up some of these additional items, or we'll get into the 2017-19 budget process and say, we want to finish certain things up, or we're going to expand on some things. And that's one thing I need to talk to you about on the tip 6. So I guess with that, knowing that, you know, a big part of what tonight is to just give you the opportunity to understand fully really what these are, and so that when we come before you next week, there's comprehension with exactly what we're accomplishing. So I guess with that, Victor, if you want to potentially talk about both. I know you're the lead on the ADA.
Sure.
And then a sub on the pavement management system, but also being our transportation engineer.
I'm comfortable talking
the
about
owner of the model, and so.
Yeah, so I'll start with the pavement management because it blends into the ADA nicely, which is why we reached out to Infrastructure Management Services The pavement management system is essentially, it's an asset management tool. Your asphalt out there is, has extremely high value. It's a major significant asset that gets overlooked by most agencies. And the primary function of the pavement management system is to identify the point in time where you need to maintain a roadway before replacing it, because replacing it costs a heck of a lot more than maintenance. And there's a balance there, and in order to be able to do that, you need to understand what you have. And the city currently has very little information about the pavement that's out there. Some of it's very old, some of it's not even certain exactly what's under the top layer. And so IMS, that's really all they do. They specialize in pavement management. What they have added is a very cost-effective and high-level data collection system. So, yeah, they have their magic van, and it's driving down the road, and it has laser cameras on it, GPS inertial systems in it. It is taking pictures straight down, it's taking pictures left and right, and it's actually looking for what we call alligator cracking in the roadway, longitudinal cracks, transverse cracks. It's recording them by the foot as it's driving to get you kind of this first part of the assessment, which is a visual assessment of the pavement. The next step, and fortunately you guys budgeted enough to be able to do these next two steps that are very important, is then gauging the structural strength of the pavement. So that's, you use what's called a falling weight deflectometer. It's a big trailer with, just like it says, a big weight on it, and you thump the pavement and you measure the reflections, and that gives you an assessment of how strong that pavement is, how many thousands of semi-trucks can drive over it before it fails. And that's a function of pavement thickness and the quality of the dirt below the pavement. And then the next level is actually understanding what pavement do you have. Is there 6 inches of asphalt, or is it a 50-year-old road that has 8 inches of asphalt on top of 8 inches of concrete on top of who knows what else? And so they use ground penetrating radar to assess the actual thickness of the pavement by essentially putting a microwave straight down. So they can tell, is this 2 inches of pavement? And this is actually, for you, just as important for some of the residential streets to understand. Are they asphalt that has 20 years of life left in it, or is what we might call a chip seal, or just an oil mat type roadway where just after years of adding oil to crushed rock, it sort of looks like asphalt, but it really isn't. And it might only have 5 years of life versus 20. So it's important to know those. And so we teamed with them when we saw that they could collect most of, and if not all, the ADA related data that we need. So for the ADA transition plan, we need to understand the condition of not only the roadway, which is relatively minor, but the curbs, the sidewalks, the driveways. Most cities have focused primarily on the curb ramps. So basically those areas where a disabled person needs to cross the street. How do they get down, get across, get back up? I did a quick field review and noticed that you guys have a lot of hills, you have a lot of older driveways, and actually your sidewalks are almost a bigger problem than the curb ramps. And so the great thing about IMS is as they're driving down the road looking straight down, they're also looking left and right. So their cameras are picking up all this information, and they can actually also pick up other features such as signs, fire hydrants, utility poles, any other obstruction in the sidewalk. And the nice thing is they collect it all at once. And so Mark talked about staging it. We can start with the curb ramps and the sidewalk, but then we can add other things because it's all sitting in their database. And their database is GIS reference. So you're going to get a big 1,000-page table, but you're also going to get images so that we can find things on a map, and we can look for hot spots. We can then be able to compare where ADA facilities are necessary versus where they are and aren't. And so that's sort of that transition. The pavement management system will let you know essentially when and where to replace asphalt to maximize its life. And also, since it's geographic, will allow you to coordinate with your utility elements, because when a utility gets replaced, it's typically going to do have significant impacts on pavement. And so you begin to balance, well, what do we do to the pavement if we're replacing the water and sewer line? And should we delay or accelerate one or the other so we aren't, especially you do not want to repave a road and come back the next year and replace the water line. It looks really silly. People don't like that. So this will give you that tool as well to cross-reference those activities. On the ADA, There's several reasons, actually there's a couple reasons for the project management or pavement management, not only for your, to manage your asset, but also most of the grant funding agencies are requiring cities to have one to demonstrate that they're maintaining their roadways in order to give them grants to build new ones or rebuild current roadways. So there's a good connection there. And we've discussed the proposed methodology, which we're proposing an Excel spreadsheet-based pavement management system so that you won't have to invest tens of thousands of dollars in a custom software platform. IMS has their own Excel-based system. I ran it by Steve Gorchester, who's the director of the Transportation Improvement Board, and he said that's fine. That works for them. It meets their criteria of a pavement management system. So you won't have to pay high maintenance fees for a custom program. Their program will work. And I think actually they reviewed their scope. They've actually provided some time for training for staff so that you can learn how to use that system on your own. And then on the ADA side, there's an emphasis from Federal Highway Administration that's gone through WashDOT to essentially enforce some rules established in 1990 that virtually no cities in the country have followed yet, which is applying the ADA requirements to the public right-of-way. And for the last 6 or 7 years, they've been trying to write the rules. It's called PROWAG, Public Right-of-Way Accessibility Guidelines. So it's what was, the original ADA was written for buildings, and it works really well for buildings. It's extremely difficult to translate out to a roadway and a sidewalk. So these new roadway rules are almost adopted, but not yet. They were supposed to be adopted 2 years ago, and then last year, and then this year, and maybe next year. But WashDOT in particular, and the federal highways, if they're going to spend federal dollars on a project, you need to demonstrate that you're compliant with these regulations and that you're going to build your facilities to those new rules that are in the PROWAG.
Is that the projects they're funding, or all of them, or our whole city?
There's two things. For the projects they're funding that's required, but you are subject to a federal lawsuit by any disabled person that cannot cross the street because you haven't provided an adequate facility. Right. And so the plan protects you from that, because you don't have to fix everything the day we write the plan. The plan just has to identify, here are the barriers that we're aware of, these are the resources we have, and the policies we're going to develop to eventually remove them all, but there's actually no requirement for whether that's 2 years or 20 years. And so part of our work will be to look at, what is the work that's necessary, how much of it will likely get handled by some of the projects in the TIP, that when you do a TIP project, you bring everything up to standard. When developers do their frontage improvements, they bring things up to standard. But there will be things that you need to eventually bring up to standard. All right.
Can you give us an example of what that new regulation might look like? I mean, how dramatic of an impact is it going to be on?
When you look at it in the field, it doesn't look that different. So the curb ramps, for instance, at intersections, the side slopes are flatter than the old standard. The ramp going into the roadway is flatter. You have to pay attention to the angle between where the ramp comes down and where the roadway grade
You
comes
need
up.
a landing, I'm talking about.
4x4 foot landing on the side.
Can't exceed 2%, right?
Exactly.
And they're very, very stringent about busting that threshold.
Yeah, so most agencies will, and one of the tasks we're suggesting is to go through your street standards and modify everything. And what we recommend is to actually have your standard be 1.75%, so you give the contractors a little leeway so that they end up building it at 2, because it's.
Will the Magic Van be able to measure those slopes as it drives by them?
They have a magic golf cart. Which is likely going to be.
There's a dollar, there's a way.
Yeah. The magic golf cart has a person or two on it. Actually measuring all the slopes that's one of the most expensive parts. And what we've typically found is every time we've done it, it's about a 95% failure rate or higher. Yeah. It's just almost every ramp does not meet the current standard. So we didn't think that it was important to do that up front, but to get an assessment of more like usable, not usable, dangerous, or non-existent. Let's get to that point first. And so the van can get that information with its digital photography. The magic golf cart actually drives along the sidewalk. It's got actually a little wheel on the back that bounces up and down on every crack. So every crack that's not ADA compliant, where you have more than a half-inch deflection in the sidewalk, is identified by its GPS coordinates. And then when they get to a curb ramp, they go out and do measure those slopes. And I checked with PSRC. and actually I did all the research with the Department of Justice, is there's no requirement for how much detail that you look for in those ramps. Other than for you guys, I do suggest the sidewalk, because you've got a lot of driveways that are actually much more hazardous to someone in a wheelchair than even your curb ramps at the intersections, as they drop down. They drop 6 inches in 1 foot, or the driveway is tilted at 8%. So if you're in a wheelchair and you hit, even some of your residential driveways, it just rolls the wheelchair into the traffic. So those are actually, to me, more hazardous, because a person in a wheelchair might have to traverse 20 of those and cross the street once. So let's fix the high risk locations first.
Right, in the city of Bellevue, I think it was Bellevue, they did do the Segway. They measured every ramp, and it was an extreme cost. And really, all it's doing is just verifying what you could have done, just on a drive-by.
I looked it enough, I can pretty much tell you if it passes or fails just without measuring anything.
Right, so we're looking at red, yellow, green. It's not existent, it's okay, or it's good, needs replacing.
Yeah.
And then I was going to touch base on what John said earlier, or I guess Rob. So or I guess Rob had mentioned, on federal projects, state projects, we have to bring it up to ADA, new construction, development projects, and we have to look at our development standards.
Yeah.
We just had a curb ramp put in, a driveway that
Right.
our standard is wrong. But with that said, on the Bethel project last year, in projects like that where we do overlays, if we touch a crosswalk, then we have to do the curb ramps because of the.
What about segments of roadway that don't have walks? Are we going to be obligated to put in sidewalks?
Well, that'll be part of our ADA transition plan.
Yeah, for instance, a rural section that doesn't have sidewalks yet, that ProWAG, the rules for right-of-way would say, well, you should have a 4-foot smooth surface of some kind. You don't have to have a curb and a sidewalk, but something for a disabled person.
So, for example, if those regulations were in place, our work that we're proposing to do on Bethel as you go south of Taco Bell, we're in trouble.
Why are we?
Well, I mean, so on the Bethel project, obviously with the new project, it will be all ADA compliant as a complete street. When we did the overlay last year, because we improved the crosswalk.
Well, I appreciate that intersection, but in sections where there are no sidewalks, at what level does it trigger we need to have to install?
We can do grind outs and mill and fills.
That's not going to trigger.
As long as we don't touch a crosswalk.
Right,
basically.
yeah.
And my next question is, how do you deal with sidewalks that are on climb, where the grades are already out of compliance if you just.
So that's been the challenge with applying ADA to roadways. So for instance, the rules say, well, we're not going to make you flatten the road to less than 8%, but if you can, you need to flatten the landings at the crosswalks, or you maximize, they don't require you to go longer than a 15-foot transition. So if you have a driveway on a steep roadway, you could have a fairly short transition going uphill, but going downhill, you'll want a 15-foot transition, so you're not making it any steeper than you need to get down to that driveway. And the driveway design shifts from just dropping the street side and having it the same height on the back. The whole driveway drops, so the sidewalk gently drops down, goes flat across the driveway, the whole thing goes up, so you're not creating that side.
So we're going to be responsible for rebuilding private driveways?
As they cross the sidewalk.
They're in your right of way. So
But your transit, I'm an example. I'm in one of these old houses, and where I park to the sidewalk, and I'm not on the steepest part of the hill, but there's a slope, probably.
Yeah, no, not your driveway. So it is
8 feet into my driveway is sloped to come down into the sidewalk, but it's not. I know my sidewalk in front of my house isn't compliant.
Yeah, so your private sidewalk.
You take some land from me?
But it's not a private sidewalk. What I'm talking about is the public sidewalk needs to come down, which means
my driveway needs to get rebuilt.
Your driveway on your side of that sidewalk has to get steeper.
Yeah,
you've got to come down to a lower level.
There's another process called the acronym is MEF. It's maximum extent feasible. So there's a recognition that at some point it's almost physically impossible to meet the standard, and so then there's a documentation process to say we can't meet the standard because 1, 2, 3 reasons. We did X, Y, and Z to get as close as we could. So you may, if it's overly steep, you may, instead of having a 4x4 foot landing, maybe you create a 4x6 foot landing, so there's maybe some recovery area so they can stop their wheelchair a little longer.
Can you use the impact on the abutting property owner as a condition of being able to comply?
Yes, again, you could use right-of-way limitations, because again, you can't really, they don't expect you to condemn private property to meet the standard.
Well, not necessarily condemn, but if we drop, using Ron's as an example, we drop the backside down, whatever, 6 inches, you're going to have to bring your driveway down to match that on your side of the right-of-way line.
Or you got a speed bump in your
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's where there's not a lot of guidance on that maximum extent feasible is sort of there's a little bit of policy flexibility for you. I mean, and again, it's did you make an effort versus you just ignored it completely. That's when folks get sued, and that's what you don't want to have happen, because there have been jurisdictions where they've been sued and the Department of Justice said, well, you actually now have 3 years to fix everything. Forget your 20-year plan to fix it as you go. We'd like you to fix everything in 3 years, which can bankrupt you if you're not careful. So you don't want to end up there.
Were you here earlier when we were learning that the state's going to be taking a lot of the city's monies away from us? You must have missed that part.
And that's another one of the tasks we suggested in the ADA transition plan, is to get a sense of what revenue is out there to be able to do it, because we really can't plan how quickly to fix it if we don't have any idea of the resources available. It also, the requirements, federal requirements require some public involvement that we want to do. Hopefully we can get some people to show up, and that's potentially an area to assess, is there a willingness for the public to pay for some of those? Because a lot of it are facilities that are 30, 50 years old that, it's not necessarily new development's fault that they don't meet current standards. So are people willing to make their sidewalks safer for themselves in existing neighborhoods? Because the new developments will have the updated standard.
Put this in the category of, once again, an unfunded mandate.
Right. Well, from Department of Justice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, you emphasize mandate.
Yeah.
So the scope we provided for Mark, essentially the add-on that we've got are the kind of the super refined, let's get every crack in the sidewalk and the hand measuring the curb ramps, but the base contract, we will identify where they all are, and we'll have the high resolution video to be able to just virtually walk down the street and say, this one works and this one doesn't. That's another thing I want to involve the community in, is if we can have those people that use the facilities, look at a couple that I know technically don't meet standards, but if the community says, well, that one works for us, don't waste your money replacing that one, give me one where it doesn't exist first. And we have that kind of flexibility in the transition plan process, so that we prioritize, all right, first thing we're going to do is eliminate the hazardous ones, then we'll provide the ones that are missing, and then the last thing we're going to do is go back and fix a 2.3% ramp into a 1.99% ramp.
And you were talking about in your additional items, the SST.
Yeah.
That's like 27,000.
Yeah, so that's the magic sidewalk golf cart. So
that would be something we might do in the future.
Right,
Not
and
necessarily.
that's a separate piece of equipment that, mobilizes separately, so we can delay that one. But we want to collect all the other data in the pavement management scope. There's some extras there that are beyond pavement, but again, they can pick up signs and pavement markings, so it'll be in the database, and so that data can be extracted potentially next year if you want. So if you want to update it, sign inventory and pavement markings, so you know where every arrow is on the asphalt. You know where every sign is. The signs overlap a little with ADA. Occasionally signs are located to where they become a barrier in the sidewalk, where there isn't a 44-inch clear path on either side of that signpost. But again, they're not high enough. But again, the primary focus is on the curb ramps, but for Port Orchard, I think your sidewalks and driveway cuts are almost a bigger issue. So I'd like to capture those two first, kind of on the red, yellow, green scale, and then we could go to a higher level of resolution as the next phase.
I think once we get the ADA plan done, based on the red, yellow, green, then we can next year budget to go out with the Segway to specifically look at the ones that warrant having a closer look.
Yeah, and so we'll develop a similar priority system where we'll look at what's the volume on the adjacent street? What's the potential demand of the disabled? So is it close to a community center or a medical facility that likely generates those types of trips, or a transit stop where someone would likely use it? So we GIS kind of get those hot spots, then cross-reference what facilities are near those, fix that first, and then we'll work our way out.
City, any question?
How often are these regulations updated? I mean, we're looking into 20 years to even begin to comply, but the regulations get even more stringent. And how do you ever catch up? You never do, really.
That's a good point. So, although again,
But we got the data.
Yeah.
We do have the data. So all we do is not sleep at night anymore, right?
And the next level of refinement is as you build new facilities to actually track when you built them, because you typically, like, if there's a curb ramp that met the 2005 standard but doesn't quite meet the 2013 standard or 2018 standard that's going to come out, that would, again, that'd be the last one you replace. If it met the standard at the time it was installed, then you can wait. But you've got some that were installed pre-1990, any standards. But that's the downside, is this real, sort of has been this mystery standard that no one did since 1990, so we're kind of catching up with 30 years of ignoring the problem. But it's taken them more than almost 10 now to just adopt this new standard. So the standards won't probably change that quickly. And if anything, I think this new standard, agencies are already feeling how expensive it is to comply. And so I think the next version might actually relax it a little. I have a theory that we might want to look at whether 6-inch curbs are really absolutely necessary, because if you make your curbs 4 inches, all these slopes get a heck of a lot easier to do if the curb is 4 inches high versus 6 inches high. And the old 6-inch curb, you know, old tires, the rubber was this high and the wheel was way up here. Well, now there's this much rubber on car tires, and a 4-inch curb will still hit metal, deflect a car. So.
I was just going to observe that this has impacts on subdivision code. If you allow for planter strips, you get that undulation. And then I know that other jurisdictions are encouraging like a 1.8% laydown, and then the inspectors will actually come in and measure those forms before they pour, so that they're not having to tear it out, because they've been required to tear them out at 2.1. It's ridiculous.
Well, cities have been required to tear them out.
Up in Kingston had to tear out at 2.1. It's just crazy, big expense.
So having, and actually that landscape strip or some other tangible differentiator between the walkway and the curb is also in that new standard. So just having sidewalk and then curb and roadway is not going to be compliant in the future.
Is there a minimum threshold by which you can come into compliance that's acceptable? Do we know what that would look like?
That's kind of gray, or that self-evaluation that you're in the process.
Right.
You're in the process, but what is that? What can you get away with?
At this point, if you identify the current condition and demonstrate that your current design standards will not make it any worse, and have some reasonable plan, you're usually okay. It's just having no plan doesn't work. But right now, you're at a bit of a risk, because when I first drove up, I forgot this hill back here, I saw that brand new driveway that was at the 8.5%, like a normal driveway. But in looking at that one, it looked safer than all the other driveways that were on the street, so it still looked better. So I would probably replace one of the other ones before I even replace that one. So there's some allowance. They didn't write the requirements so strictly that all of a sudden you have a $20 million mandate next year. We just have to work together to figure out, here are the ones that are going to get, done by city projects that are planned in the 20-year plan. We already have a list of them. Here's a bunch of roads that are going to be upgraded. So we probably don't need to specially go out and do that curb ramp right now. If it's already the 20-year plan for that road to be improved, we could say, whatever standards in place when we design XYZ intersection in 2020, it's going to be okay. So let's not waste our time fixing it right now, unless it's one of those hazardous ones we identified.
Yeah, obviously the older parts of the city are problematic, or that you've got 3-foot sidewalks with very non-compliant anything, or you get into the areas of the city where there's just really a chip seal and there's nothing. So it just at least moving, once we have a contract, if we had somebody from the Access Board or Department of Justice come in and say, well, at least we're now under contract. We've made tremendous strides from our previous deadline in 1991. Is that we budgeted it, and now we're under contract. So there is leeway given for jurisdictions that are at least moving forward, because a lot of them are just not.
So do they take the Magic Van down all of the city streets?
Yeah,
Yeah.
All of them, not just the arterials, but
no,
all of the
it's
city
all
streets?
61.
Okay, well,
Lane miles.
that ball that they bounce off, yeah, they don't want to do that on my road.
Well, is it going to cause any damage, or is it really just measuring?
Oh, yeah, it would break the road.
Well, it sounds from your description that it could be damaging some of the roads.
I'm fairly confident that, I'm not a geotechnical engineer, they can probably tell if they shouldn't do it. I'm not sure if they can adjust how high, but it's, it's a big plate, it's not a very sharp thing, so, I don't know that it's actually that much more load than a truck going over the road.
Okay.
It's doing it instantaneously and measuring the reactions around it. So it's really, it's basically there are sensors on either end of this trailer, and this thing thumps the middle, and it's measuring the vibration at either end, so within a 20-foot spectrum, so it's not.
It's not like a wrecking ball.
No.
Okay.
No, but the point is taken. I mean, there's some roads out by, the southeast part of the city where it's literally a quarter-inch thick of gravel and dirt and oil.
And they'll probably determine on their own that there's nothing to test here.
There's nothing.
This is a gravel road.
If you're really testing the subgrade, and if they're driving down, there's some roads that I'm like, well, there is no subgrade. This is literally an old county two-shot where they just put pea gravel and oil over the years, and that's all it is. It's just on dirt. It's an old dirt road with a two-shot on it. So they probably won't thump that.
Well, I live down on Perry below back. They're gonna have to bring a magic mountain bike on that road because, yeah, it's paved with cookie dough, clumps of cookie dough.
Well, Sean and I were talking as we're moving to the Transportation Benefit District and all these new regulations coming down, we need to figure out how we can put license tabs on wheelchairs, walkers.
That's true. Skateboards and bicycles.
You're going to have Jerry come speaking at the next meeting.
Sorry, Jerry, we're obligated, you heard it.
So are you all thoroughly freaked out now?
Yes.
Any other questions for Victor? Okay.
Don't ask the question if you don't want to know the answer.
I'm very positive because sitting in a chair where we're living by we get a mulligan. When somebody trips or has an issue and they get hurt, we didn't know about it. It's kind of a tough way to spend a day, knowing now that if somebody from the Access Board or Department of Justice were to come into the city, to be able to say, yeah, we're under contract, we're working on it. We've talked with PSRC, we've talked to WashDOT, we've defined what a self-evaluation is for the city. We've made tremendous strides in 2016 already with our GIS platform, which we didn't have previously, on all water, sewer, transportation, signage, striping. So, we're doing all the right things that I think would at least keep us from getting in trouble like some of these big cities that have been fined.
We're not ignoring the issue, we're just not there yet.
I presume we'll get a map of the hotspots at some point, we can start looking at.
Yeah, what I'd like to do is collect and map the data and before our first public meeting so that we actually have something to share and say, and then actually if we map the hotspots, then we can talk to the community about, are these areas of concern, or where do you think we need these facilities more than where do we have them? But at least start out with some information, and we can also have photographs. I'd actually like the disabled community. I want to be able to show 5 or 6 different conditions of driveways and curb ramps and say, can you live with this? It doesn't meet standards, but it's here's a 1998 curb ramp design. It's a little steeper than the 2015 standard, but it's usable. Versus here's a 1957, 6-inch down, 45-degree angle driveway. How's that one work? So.
But for the most part, just like a snow route or something, you're gonna have routes that are safer and work. I mean, I don't know anyone who would take a wheelchair down Klein. I mean, unless they were a daredevil of some sort. And it will never ever be that way. So would you really be doing those kinds of ramps and things on Klein?
You just have to have, for instance, a policy that if a project comes up, or even a development that's, even if they're gonna do 500 feet, at least you require them to bring that 500 feet up to standard. So eventually, as things get improved, you're closer to meeting the standard. Or someone who's taking a 1 mile journey, 50% of it's compliant now, and in 10 years, maybe 55% will be compliant, and 50 years, maybe 75. There's not an expectation of perfection anywhere, just improve it. But also, as you stated, if we know that no one's using that steep hill, well, let's spend the money on the sort of steep hill that they are risking themselves on now. Let's put it there. And
Put it on Kitsap Street.
Part of our, now that you mentioned that, part of our program might actually be, not only a safe routes to school, but a safe routes for the disabled. Let's make a map for the city that says, if you want to try to get across the city in a wheelchair or a walker or some other mobility device, here's the longer route, but this is the better, safer route. Stay away from this road because it's like this.
And to that end, I know that you'd want to take care of those emergent issues, but maybe you'd want to look at our centers and then look at spreading out and having those compete with each other before we fix it.
Yeah, we want to look at general population density and then special populations. We'll look at accident history to see if there are any documented real problems that we should address right away. But again, just 2 blocks away, just up the street from the driveway that just got put in, is a marked school crossing with flags that has a non-compliant curb ramp on one side and a vertical curve on the other side. So we might want to think about those types of locations as well. If you're going to encourage someone, hey, cross here, look at the big sign. Oop, I can't.
And then if I can just also interject that I believe that this program is going to also help us be in compliance with our new insurers requirements that will be required to be in effect 2017. And we're supposed to do some sort of inventory of all of our streets and sidewalks and the conditions. So this will help us reduce our liability in the future.
All right, so we beat this to death?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to our next issue. Thank you, Victor.
Thank you.
So the next one is Transportation Benefit District, and Mr. Martin, this is Mr. Martin's, but I'll take it. And as we know, at our last council meeting, we started the process to move that from a separate body into the council. The other piece is a funding mechanism, and we said we'd bring that back to the work study. I think we need to get this, whatever we're going to do, done sooner versus later, because the longer we wait, the longer before we're going to have funds. From our last work study, I think there was three points that was discussed. One, whether it was going to be, we put an advisory vote on the ballot. 2, whether we councilmatically impose the $20 car tab. Or 3, we put a ballot measure out there for a larger amount. Up to $100 is what we could do up to that amount. So,
My first question is, could TBD be used for sidewalk repair?
It could. I think it could.
Yeah.
Well then, I know the answer.
So, that being said, in the next council meeting or two, whatever the direction is, I'd like to work with staff to get it implemented. So, you guys have the votes.
Is there a reasonable number that would actually help us make improvements? I mean, councilmatically, we could do $20, and obviously $20 is going to help us achieve some, but
As I remember.
based on what we just heard here tonight, that sum has grown substantially.
But what I'm remembering is for every $10 of car tab, it generates $100,000.
I just did the math here. It's what we have right now will generate $199,160 at $20.
One intersection of ramps will probably chew up a year's worth of funding.
But we don't have to fix them all
No.
tomorrow.
I know, but we still have roads to fix too.
Yes.
And we have debt service on Arlington. So I guess to answer your question, John, for me, the benefit to go to 30 versus 20 now, in like the overall scheme of water rates have increased and all these other things, I don't think that extra $10 is buying you much other than a lot of political capital.
I wouldn't necessarily suggest that we go on for $30 versus 20. I was thinking more like 40 or 50 versus 20.
I was going to say, live in Tacoma, and the voters did just approve the car tab increase in Tacoma, and I think they set it to $60, but they put forward a pretty detailed plan, and I think what Victor's putting together for the PMS and the transition plan is potentially the tool that you can show people to say, these are the projects that we're going to prioritize. And until you have that, I think it's hard to sell to the voters.
That's an excellent point. If we don't have a plan and specifically where we're funding, I think we're wasting citizens' money to put it on a ballot.
Well, and you've got to pay attention to what just happened. There's 2 school measures that did not pass. And we've just raised our utility
Yeah, but
rates.
that's a little misleading though, Cindy.
Well,
Those school measures, the majority of the population was in favor of it, just not 60%.
Super majority.
Right, but we've had people who've come here and talked to us about the difficulties they have with the utility increases. We know that we've got Tremont that's going to probably have to have some other funding. We've got improvements on this building. There's so much that we're asking the public for in the way of increases. I can't see going beyond $20. And there's an administrative fee that goes along with it. Most families have how many cars?
There's no administrative fee to the $20. It's
No, well, yes there is. I thought that when we had collected, we don't get $20
From the
for
state.
it.
the state
For processing.
processing.
Right, which I
That's
thought,
for the entire,
so we don't get a whole $20 back?
Correct. Correct.
What do we get back? Do we know?
It's about, what was it?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Was it
I think the difference in my mind, Cindy, is we're not forcing it on there, we're asking it. If you put a number on the ballot, you're asking the voters to support it. You're not forcing it. If they say yes, great. If they say no,
Oh, so you're thinking about taking it to a vote, is what you're
well,
talking
and
about?
saying if we're taking to a vote, taking to a vote for something more than $20.
I hear that.
Now, if that failed, we could just go back. Okay, all we get is $20. Is that what?
I think Nick makes a very good point, though. I don't believe we're ready. I don't think we're ready to put something on the ballot. I think
But are we ready to impose $20 in?
I am, because there are needs, and even if after we impose the $20, it's at least 6 months before we see any money. And our needs are not stopping. And I do not want to jeopardize our other funding sources for Tremont because we're not taking advantage of the tools at our hand.
I concur with you. I think we ought to roll out 20 and at the same time begin to inform on why the voters ought to approve 50 or 60.
But I think we need to inform them why we're doing the 22
Mhm.
also. I mean, it's not that we're just going to do 20 because we can. It's like this is where it goes to, and then it sets the foundation if we do a 40 or 50. Did Tacoma do a 20 councilmatically and then they just increased it, or how did they do
I
it?
think that's how that worked, and I think it did take 2 votes.
Okay.
But, I mean, they had a glossy pamphlet that they sent out, and they highlighted every road in the city that was going to be fixed. But I think if you were to adopt 20, you could say that with $20, this is what we're going to do, and it's very limited. With 60, this is the difference, and you need to show the before and after.
Well, there's nothing that says you can't do the 20 and then go back to the voters.
Yeah. But that's not, yes, at a later date, you consider going to the voters.
I would sure hope, and versus the grind out process we're doing too, that if we're doing 20 or 60 or whatever that number is, that we're doing complete streets and we're doing something out like WashDOT does when they do a highway project. Here's your $20 at work at the beginning of this project and the end, and we're paving, residential streets in entirety.
Those signs are expensive, but I agree.
Well, they don't have to be big ones like WashDOT does because they're on the
$100
freeway.
signs.
But we're moving them every year to the next street.
Right, and I know, I was just going to say, we have to remember the $200,000 plus administrative fees that we're going to collect every year is not going to put a lot of pavement on the roads, but it's going to allow us to do more than we are right now.
Well, it may help us get compliant with DOJ requirements.
Correct.
And that's a great message to kick out. Our backs are against the wall.
And I know the council is aware of that, but there are additional funding sources available for the Transportation Benefit District.
We know that.
Yeah, so the car tab is not the only option
Correct.
for funding.
What were the, sorry?
property tax for a
And
benefit
retail sales
district and
tax.
retail sales tax also.
Would both require votes, so the CARTAB's the only council-matic option, funding option.
Yeah, we could come together with a funding plan for Bethel or other
And they're not
projects.
mutually exclusive, so you could use more than one at a time as well.
That will be competing with a fast ferry, huh?
Might be.
Just say it.
I think at the end of 2016, things are going to really be coming into focus. We're going to know by then what we have for Tremont, what our debt service is going to be on Tremont. Bay Street basically is in focus. Our ADA and pavement management system will be done. So our capital plan will be done this year. So I think the end of this year is really, we're going to see kind of the low-hanging fruit and what the different, whether it's the TBD or the impact fees, where that money's going to need to go for Tremont and then for the Bethel design and, moving forward. So, I would just as staff recommend, you do the 20 now, that at least build us some cash flow to start paying some debt service. And then at the end of the year, this time next year, we're having a conversation of a much clearer picture of transportation wise.
I guess when I am required to take a vote on the $20, I would hope that money is going to our
It's
our
not
streets. It's not doing debt
Yes, it's
service.
not.
It's going on the ground so
Something
that our
tangible, yes.
so that our citizens have smoother roads to drive on.
That would be great. I'm just saying, depending on the success we have in the regional and these other ones, we may not have an option.
But it may free up our other transportation dollars that may need to get used for Tremont.
Yeah.
This has been communicated at least
This is voted for street
for street repairs
Yeah.
from the beginning, as far as conversation we've been having.
Yes, something tangible.
Yes.
Right. If we're supplanting this for money that would normally go into
Yeah, it's
repairs.
squeezing a balloon.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
So what I'm hearing, consensus for staff to work on bringing forward the $20 car tab. We're going to work on a long-range plan with the tools that we're going to get potentially to bring a future ballot measure forward.
I think we should put the $20 to the voters, personally.
I do too, actually.
How much would that cost?
Depending on which ballot you get it on, it would be a portion of whatever it's, like November, is that too
What
late?
if we started with a public hearing, just to gauge additional litmus, spread the word about it, try to get people here before we commit to spending $50,000 or $70,000 and see what we hear.
I think if we're putting it on November, we're talking $10,000 or $12,000.
Yeah, it wouldn't be 50.
Right, but I think that's a good approach.
John, did you say
$20
going
is
for 20?
irresponsible.
Did you say going
Yes.
for 20? Well,
Car tabs are a really hot topic.
Yeah. I know, but we had the same conversation last time where do you go if you go out for 20 and it doesn't pass? Then you go back and just councilmatically do it, because that's a slap in the face.
Well, I'm suggesting if they say no, you don't do it.
I say if you're gonna go over the vote, you gotta go for 30, and then you say, well, we'll do 20, but if you do 20 and it doesn't pass, you're stuck. I mean, speaking just as a voter.
What I'm hearing here is that we want to proceed potentially with a public hearing on the matter. And we'll let the council deliberate on whether it's put on the ballot or we're going to do it councilmatically.
Sure,
Is that what I'm hearing?
That's
Yeah.
good for me.
All right. On to the next item.
Just a quick question for Victor. When will we have an idea of how much we're looking at in terms of costs for sidewalk repair? When will we have an idea what the bottom dollar for that effort is?
I think it's in the budget, that's capital.
We were gonna do some, we can start a rough number. Given that probably 95% need replacement anyway, we can probably get the top number fairly
Right,
quickly.
right.
Just
I
on
mean,
the
it-
ballpark.
That's the kind of information that the public should hear as well.
All right, we're on to our last item of the evening, the McCormick Village Park design. Nick wants to spend more money.
So,
Get the car tab first before we have a
the last work study meeting, we had Charlie Scott from Jones & Jones attend and give a presentation on the design options for McCormick Village Park. and he presented items 1 through 13, which are essentially the items that are required in our grant agreement that we've committed to build. And the preliminary engineer's estimates on those have us about $67,000 over budget on those items. He also presented a handful of alternatives that for one reason or another make sense to move forward with now because of the logistics of constructability in terms of getting equipment into the park and out of the park without, if you go to do these improvements in the future, you're going to potentially damage improvements that you're paying for now under this grant. Item number 14 was a water feature, and he presented two alternatives, a spray water park and a stream play water feature. And so those two items were $130,000 and $90,000 respectively, and are essentially, we did say that we would do a water feature in our grant, however, we didn't say what type of water feature we would do. And so we're asking the council to weigh in on whether they want to go forward with designing one of these and whether it is, I think we're sort of at the phase that if we're going to do an active water feature, now is the time, and if we're not going to do an active water feature, we'll come up with something passive and decorative and scale this down quite a bit.
We call an irrigation system a water feature.
Put a garden hose on the building.
A leaking
We're gonna have the fire department.
Bird bath. So essentially, and we're looking for council direction tonight because the consultant is moving forward on the design, but these are the three things that are sort of hanging out there. Item number 15, they presented two options, A and B, although I didn't hear a lot of support for a active learning center, and I think without the school moving forward, I don't know that that makes sense at that location, but there is certainly a lack of a dog park facility on that side of the city. There is one out Mile Hill, out at the edge of the city's urban growth area boundary, but nothing on the west side of 16, and so that was a $40,000 improvement. But in that meadow area, because we're putting in a bridge where the existing culvert is, and because we're going to be building the entry plaza, there's going to be no way to get heavy equipment back there at a later date. So again, it's a sort of now or never type of item. And then finally, item 16 was the adult fitness equipment, which this is the one item that if we wanted to skip right now, it would not be that hard to put that in later, but it's also the least expensive item at $28,000, and the idea was that adults could get a workout while their kids are playing on the gym equipment. And then finally, when we started talking about a water park, it occurred to us that there's probably not enough parking to support the demand that there will be for people to use that in the summer. And so we got a quote on just doing a temporary parking lot expansion onto the fire district site, and the Chief Wright was okay with us putting temporary parking there that would be just a gravel parking area, and we provided a drawing that showed just conceptually what that could look like. And so that was a $35,000 improvement, plus it's not in our design scope of work, and so that would require a minor contract.
My numbers are different. The parking lot on my sheet says 40,000.
That's what's up there is 40.
I think that's because it includes the design and the construction.
Okay.
So in the memo, it's separated as design and construction. So in any event, we worked with Alan, and there's a sheet that has some blue and yellow lines. It's one of his budget forms. And as we look at our cash flow, clearly the way to pay for this is with park impact fees, because that's our steady stream of revenue for capital improvements, and this park is part of our park impact fee calculation. And so we currently have plenty of cash flow to support most of this project, including the alternatives. And now that we're going to a biennial budget, we're actually in the 2017-2018 budget, we're actually only about $80,000 short by the end of 2018 based on our projections. And so it's $81,000 if you round up. And so it's really a cash flow issue for finance in the 2017-2018 biennium if we decide to go forward with this. Plus it's coming up with that deficit, which right now is $81,000, but you'd probably need to find a way to front yourself some park impact fee money that would come in later as construction moves forward.
And
so,
when he's talking about cash flow here, and so when these projects, Tremont and this project, we have to work off a reimbursement. So we're building things, have to use our cash, and then get reimbursed. And if we've got two major projects going on, we still need to be able to make payroll. And
it's not only that, but the park impact fee money, we're budgeting money that's coming in that biennial cycle, and so the project's occurring less than a quarter. It's starting less than a quarter of the way into our biennial budget, but the funding takes the full 2 years to come in, and so the park impact fee budget potentially goes into the red until the very end of that cycle. But really, I think the question now is, does the council want to proceed with any of these alternatives? If so, which ones? And then I think based on that direction, Alan is going to move forward and come up with a plan for making the financial side of this work. And I think that I provided some data on what's going on with our building activity, and I know McCormick Woods is the one that's really moving ahead. They've now logged and they have their site development permits for grading work, and they're planning on getting started on construction of roads this season with potentially home building again next spring. And so that's 172 houses there by itself without looking at any of the other projects. I think in the next 5 years we're going to see a pretty good single-family boom. But obviously that growth has to occur, and we can't have any major economic things happen. So there's options. You can have them design some of this stuff and make it a bid alternative, and we can wait for the bids to come in and decide whether we're going to move forward with certain pieces. You can also, there is the potential, if we design this and decide we do want to make these improvements and it's going to cost too much, we can ask the agency for another year, and if they're seeing that we're going to do more amenities, they might give us another year on our contract to build this, and so potentially it's a 2018 construction rather than 2017. And obviously between now and then you can see how revenue is coming in for park impact fees and make the decision on that request at a later date.
is that realistic? When are we supposed to break ground on this project?
We're supposed to break ground next June, so about a year from now. But in my experience in working with RCO, I have gotten an extension on a project previously, but that was going into the recession, and so I think everybody was sort of hit with the same financial problems at the same time, and they said, yeah, well, we can give you 2 more years to do this. So I think it is possible, especially if they're seeing us doing more than what was initially proposed in the grant.
When I had my meeting with Brianna prior to our meeting, I mentioned to her that we might want to push this out, and she kind of wrinkled her nose up a little bit. She says there's good reasons to do that because things that are out of your control, like
it's another opportunity to thank our legislators.
Well, it was more we needed some environmental report that was out of our control, or things that are out of our control, and she wasn't real excited about the fact that our own internal funding need may not go over real well and could lose some credibility.
Can we phase it any more than we have? Like do 2/3 of it?
I mean, really, the only improvement that you could phase would be that adult fitness equipment, because it can go in later. But the groundwork and the mobilization, I mean, it seems like a big project, but the mobilization and earthwork is going to be a pretty big component, and it's hard to bring all of that equipment
Can we
on
scale
twice.
back the play area? It went from 70,000 to 125. It's almost double. That's almost the difference that we're talking about.
Yeah, and when we came up with the initial budget amount, we were looking at we didn't have real detailed engineers estimates, but we looked at what it cost to put in the Gibbons Field improvements and to refresh that area, which is a very basic playground. And so I think it was orders of magnitude larger to do a more modern play feature or play toy than what we did in that instance.
I think it's pretty easy to pull out the adult fitness equipment.
Yeah, I think that's no question.
And we can always add it back in later, or build it later with future park impact fees when we collect them. I mean, and that takes that number down to 50, a negative 50.
Right. Staff recommendation from Public Works would be, take out something that you just don't feel great about, but the other elements, put them in your, have them designed, because that's, from a standpoint of dollars, to have those pieces just designed, it's de minimis. Then you've got it, because right now our estimates are just that. They're just engineers' estimates and architectural estimates. But if you get them in the plans as a bid alternate, then when you go out to bid, you have actual numbers. And that gives you two things. One is it gives you the option to pick up, schedule, or bid all 3 and 4, and it gives you a number to then budget for a previous budget or something to go after, because it's a tangible number. It's just no longer an estimate. So I would take out what you just don't want and put the rest of them in the design package as bid alternates.
Well, I would personally take out the adult exercise. That doesn't do a thing for me. I have good fortune of working next to all the fountains and stuff that Bremerton installed, and I'm every year amazed at how many people come downtown just to use that, just wade in and whatever. I think the water feature is something that would increase the effectiveness of that park substantially.
So when we talked about this last, you said you were going to talk to Bremerton and see.
Yeah, I've got a meeting with Bremerton next week and that developer, and so I'd like to raise this issue then as something that possibly could help with this. But you know, if I had to make a recommendation right now, I would say the spray park I think is going to be a home run in terms of popularity. I think the dog park also, you know, that area is going to be a mess if it doesn't get straightened out in terms of the stumps and all the weeds.
Can I ask you about that
Yeah.
element? So you said that it would be difficult to leave out because of access, but wouldn't we want or need access in there such that it would be wide enough for small equipment to come in?
We have that already. We have a gravel trail that goes back there, but right now you can get to that gravel trail in a vehicle without, you know, tearing things up. I think if you're talking about bringing in, you know, an excavator, that's different than bringing in a pickup truck for maintenance.
Right, we have our perimeter access road, but once the parking and the water features and that whole kind of protected entry is in place, yeah, getting heavy equipment to go back and do clearing and grubbing and grading is going to be much more difficult. So anything of that nature, yeah.
And remind me, how big is the dog park we're looking at, area-wise?
Oh, it's...
I mean, is it so big that you need heavy equipment versus smaller equipment to do?
You need it for the stumps. I mean, it was logged, but it wasn't, the stumps weren't removed.
100 by 250, 25,000 square feet.
I have a couple of comments. And my first comment is, when we looked at the water feature alternatives last time, I personally preferred the stream one to the splash park.
I did too.
And that was only 90,000. So that's 40 less than the splash park. And there were a number of reasons why I preferred it, not the least of which it was typically used for 6 months a year. And the splash park is typically, according to this, a 3-month issue. Other questions that came to mind, and so if we did the stream type water feature, and we didn't do the exercise equipment, we've almost taken care of our cash flow issue. Okay.
Well, our year ending number is still, we're still going to be challenged with cash
With
flow.
cash flow, correct,
during
but
the
your
Deficit problem.
The deficit problem.
The deficit goes away.
Okay, now the other thing that came to my mind, and I emailed both Mark and Nick about this, is this park is going to be more significant than other parks we have. So I question, what is that going to do to our maintenance cost annually? Because that's going to increase our budget. And then I asked, you know, the water features, you know, is how much additional maintenance of one over the other, you know, would there be? Is that a number that we would want to consider? I also just wondered what an active water feature, where the kids are either splashing or, you know, the stream type, what that does to our liability insurance. is that going to be an additional expense there? Probably not nearly as much as if it were a swimming pool. But I think as we make these decisions, there are other expenses that we're going to have to absorb with this park. And I just was kind of, we're going to have it regardless of what we put out there. But I just kind of wondered, do we have an idea of what that might be?
Yeah, and I think, I had asked, I think Brandy put in a call to AWC, I don't know if we got an answer yet.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard, but Mark and I talked about this today, and, you know, obviously the maintenance, you're gonna have a water bill related to the water feature, and it's different depending on which one, but
Yeah,
it's in the vicinity of $3,000 a year, I think, and maybe less for the stream play feature. With the dog park and the park in general, trash collection and mowing, mowing's going to happen with or without the dog park, but those are going to be the two big expenses that I don't think we currently have.
Will we
That's
anticipate?
$1,000 a month, probably.
Yeah, will we anticipate renting space out there?
Well, you are going to have picnic shelters, so there is that possibility for the picnic shelters, and I think that a lot of times the dog parks, you have a pretty strong volunteer group that can form around maintaining those, and so that may not be as big of an issue other than emptying a dumpster, you know, a couple of times a week.
I guess from my standpoint, Beck, is that how much additional maintenance would one feature over another feature be? Because we're gonna put in the park, and we're gonna have to maintain the park to a certain level, so what would be the additional cost for a splash park versus a stream?
I think we were getting those numbers, and I recall it was fairly nominal between the two.
Yeah, and we designed the system, I mean, we're not recycling water, it's purely a runoff type of situation where it's gonna go to an infiltration facility. And so it's really the water bill, and then if kids go out there and break something, occasionally we may have a repair, but that's a little less predictable.
Here's my run with the water feature. So when you look at the spray parks, those are really developing your social skills. And when you're looking at those stream and play parks, those are really developing your cognitive skills. I'd like to see us develop a hybrid of the two, meet in the middle, one that has features of both. Because the spray parks, I mean, there's nothing better for your bang. As a kid, I mean, those are hugely
I'd
popular.
like it to be downtown where we can then sell them something and get sales tax.
So is that a possibility?
That's a different part, Fred.
A hybrid?
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly explore that, though I think that you're going to be looking at two parallel systems because you're not going to want to have kids playing in the water from the spray park that's then going through a feature necessarily. I mean, I don't know at what point you want to divert dirty water.
No, of course, that wouldn't be acceptable, but I mean, are there models out there that we can look at?
Not that I've found.
What turns to irrigation and waters the lawn or something?
We're looking at probably a rain garden type facility that this would flow into.
I was thinking we could put a membrane pocket plant in there at our pump station, just the effluent.
I mean, realistically, you could capture this water in a cistern, and it'd be augmenting the irrigation system somehow, you know.
You got the pump on it.
Right, then you have a pump. So I guess to answer Beck's earlier question, I guess John's comment is, I looked at it much more holistically in the sense that, again, 8 years ago, we just had Vanzee, Paul Powers, Central Park, Givens, and kind of those current old conditions. Now we have the Bay Street pedestrian pathway, the DeKalb Pier, and even with those additions with this project, it's really going to be, this project's just going to push us into this whole different level of demand on parks and our one park person, and we've already been managing it through increasing our contract. So I think that's just indicative of the fact that we're really pushing up against this envelope of, we put on a major park with these sorts of facilities that are going to require much more, you know, maintenance, clearing, garbage, mowing. We're really talking about, you know, a parks person, you know.
Yeah, but my point, Mark, is we're gonna put in a park. So I guess we have to accept that fact that you're saying.
That's another discussion.
Yeah.
We need to acknowledge it. We're building the park.
We're building the park.
To what
It's gonna
level?
increase
That's
demand
the
on
question here tonight.
I was just
Staffing
trying to
and all
answer Beth's question more holistically in that we're really just talking about more staff, a staff person.
I have another question for Nick. On the second page, you referenced some subdivisions that are coming online. Which of those 6, well, I know the first one is, but of the balance, which of those are going to be using this park?
So Stetson Heights is on the west side of 16, but it's closer to Sydney and Sedgwick than it is to the north end. But I would imagine those residents would probably head in this direction.
Right.
Especially if there's an active water park feature or water spray feature. Riverstone is right off of Lund at Bethel, and so it's not far from this park, but it's not real close. And then Andazio is also off of Bethel between Lund and Sedgwick.
Either way, they're paying, it's a citywide park impact fee.
No, I get that. I was just trying to figure out.
And I really think based on Bremerton's experience with downtown, they're driving in from who knows where to get to that water feature.
Well,
No, there's not too many people that live in the downtown area.
It's our regional park.
Yeah, it would become, I would imagine that we're gonna get people from this part of the city that has children during warm days to go out there.
Coming from Mason County and
Right.
Well,
County.
We'll have to change the bus route.
It's getting complicated, John.
Okay, so what's the consensus? We're
I'm
Mark's,
for it.
Mark's idea to go out with bid alternates,
Yeah, I
to
think that's a
remove
great
the
approach.
adult exercise equipment. I've heard conflicting opinions about the water feature. Is it the interactive one or is it the passive stream?
I'd like to spray some of it.
I think the spray park is the way to go. I mean, I was only there a few years ago. We would go to Bremerton and hang out there and
I
it was
agree.
just tire the kids out.
I'm hearing 5 for a spray park, I think.
Is that something though in your design that you could, plumb it where it could be scalable in the future? Where you've got,
The
what I'm saying?
stream goes down to a waterfall.
Where you're doing the dirt work and we're throwing in some extra 1-inch lines or something, or in the future, you could phase out a second,
Yeah, I really like
if
the
this
idea of
breeds
both.
more development out there and it creates more impact fees, and we come in and add a
We can ask
$50,000 water
them.
feature.
We can ask them about expansion possibilities.
Put the plumbing in the ground on the front end of it.
I'm just again, I'm thinking sanitary. So, I mean, with the water flowing through or spraying, it's just going through and going away. If it's reused in any sense, like from a downstream, we just have to think about. I'm not saying it's being stored, but even if you have something that's.
I think we put it out to bid. We create it with bid alternates.
Let
Put it
the
out to-
experts figure that out.
And we get the number, and we may have to have a discussion about this again, whether or not we can afford what the number we get when we put it out to bid.
Doesn't Olympia have the spray park? Do you remember that? Have you been to Olympia's spray park?
Yeah.
Is it
I
still,
drive to the one in Bellevue.
well, is it still working?
I'm not sure, I haven't been down.
Well, the last I was there, it wasn't working any longer, and I didn't know why.
Well, they turn them off in the winter.
No, it was the summertime.
If they have a recirculating system, that's why we were going away
That's
from
why
that.
Bremerton's having the problems, because you have to filter it and treat it, and we're not gonna go with that. We're gonna
Well,
take
Bremerton's
water.
problem was that those things were designed to be fountains.
Right.
Right, and
Not
the kids are
swimming
playing
pools.
in there.
And they've become a swimming pool, so now they gotta deal with filtration.
I think this is going to be a much more simple system from an operational standpoint. There still is, kids are going to go try to jam things in.
Bremerton's fountain, it just shoots little
Yeah.
Yes.
things of water. There's hundreds of children down there
Oh, yeah.
splashing in it all the time.
I can't
Don't
resist
they
poking my
have
hand
a
in.
stream like one,
This is big enough for an inner tube, I don't know if it'll.
no,
work.
on the other side? Where do I want to say?
Where they got the fish jumping the stairs.
Next to the shipyard?
Along
Yeah, next to the
uh,
shipyard.
Pacific Avenue,
Yeah.
yeah. Not too many folks playing fountain. They do have a fountain area that's right at the corner of Burwell and Pacific, where they do kind of play in that.
Yeah.
But most of them go down to those fountains that are next to the ferry terminal.
Bring this back in.
Because there's this much water.
Scott.
Scott, oh, it's getting late.
So
What about the parking?
the parking that, I think we felt that the parking that was originally proposed was inadequate even before we added the spray feature. So then we looked at adding on this alternative. What happens when the fire district comes online?
There's a joint parking lot proposed with the fire district. It's just in a different configuration to accommodate their building.
Okay.
And
Is there a
we-
way to pre-design this so that there's some cost savings?
We're just grading it and graveling it at this
Okay.
point.
Yeah, it's gonna
And
be
our
really
phase
fast.
3 has another parking lot on the other side.
Okay.
I think the more important consideration is gonna be when we do an Old Clifton sub-area plan and corridor study is coming up with, are we gonna have some on-street parking or shoulder
Right.
parking in some area? And are things gonna slow down, and maybe that's how you supplement this? Also, what are the pedestrian connections from the adjacent neighborhoods so that people can walk here?
Okay.
Unfortunately, the school district was going to answer the wrong one.
I did. Just a couple quick things for the good of the order. Latest iteration of the welcome packet is here. It's got Fred's. There's a revision date now, Fred. And so I've been trying to incorporate your guys' comments.
If you have comments, who we give it to?
Send them to me.
All right.
Can I have one?
You may, I gave you one.
I ate it. My dog ate it. Where did you give it to?
There you go. Another one. And then, I was at the passenger only ferry committee this morning. I tossed some of these around. It just shows the costs of a current commute versus what it would cost and the time savings. I thought it was good information. And then Cindy's got a new flyer for the high speed. You did this, didn't you? No, somebody did this. You're doing Chimes and Lights.
Chimes and Lights.
Janine did this one for the passenger only ferry. So, and you had something?
I have fun stuff. I want to talk about the parade,
Oh, yes.
okay?
Thomas, you need to listen to this.
Yes, Thomas, you need to listen to this. You are involved. Okay, we have ordered the balloons. The balloons will be here this week, so we're excited. But the balloons will not arrive inflated.
So you want
Yeah.
politicians with a lot of hot air.
That's correct. I came to the right group. So what we want to do, and it's June 25th is parade day, and we'll need to set some time aside to blow up the balloons. And Brandy and I are making the arrangements, and we'll probably do it here in this room. Now comes the part where Thomas gets to get involved, is the balloons will be on sticks. And you can make a balloon bouquet, and there will be 10 or 12 balloons in a bouquet. That's about what will fit. And we'll put a rubber band around those. So we'll walk down the street handing out our balloons, okay? But we can't carry 1,000 balloons by ourselves, okay? So we need a
Is it
vehicle.
really heavy?
We need some way to transport the balloons down Bay Street, and then we can take them out as we need them.
It's too bad we
Is
can't
this
get
making
people to blow
sense?
them up themselves.
Thomas, we
Here's your
had
balloon.
a 10-yard truck, and we had a lightweight netting. Once all the balloons were blown up, that we would have somebody that would be driving the truck all shiny with the lights going on down the road behind the council members. And these bouquets are in bundles. Now, the balloon gets blown up. I've looked at my air compressor, and I do have a spray thing that has kind of a rubber tip. If I can turn the pressure down enough, you might be able to slip that on, but that's still somebody blowing up 1,000 of those.
Right.
Or do you have to tie it onto the stick?
No, we have a system. I have done this several times.
Use Mylar.
Yeah, but we have reserved one, because so far that's all I've found, is what they call it, air balloon inflator. And you just push the button and you put the, and then you have a, clasp or a seal, and you just kind of weave the balloon through that, and then we insert the stick into it. And
Or you get like an end cap that
and then, correct.
you stick it on the stick.
Yes, and
Water balloons would be a lot more fun.
I know, and we kind of have
Heavy.
to.
Story.
Heavy.
We kind of have to, so what I'm saying is we'll probably need, if you can get some assistance to help blow up the balloons, that would be good. And it would be more entertaining if we had music on our truck. So I don't know if someone has a boombox or something that,
Play all our iPhones at the same
that we could play all our iPhones, if we could think of some way to have music. And
What's wrong with the clock tower? You I mean,
It's hard to hear, Don.
It's hard to hear in front of an
Well, if
NV.
anybody's got, I mean, if there's Wi-Fi signal, you're gonna get a Pandora, and somebody could put something on Pandora, and they've got all these speakers that are very loud. So I think the biggest issue is getting the balloons blown up and getting them in the truck.
What day is it?
June 25th.
It's a Saturday.
My mail's
Getting them in and out of
What
the
do you think
container
about the
truck
balloon
is.
party?
Well, you're just
It'll
gonna
be
have to
Saturday during the day.
and load them in.
Yeah, it'll be
So
during
it's gonna
the day.
take 2 employees, Tom. You're gonna have to have
It's
somebody driving the
gonna-
truck
before
and somebody in the
Sunday.
back of the truck taking the bouquets out and giving
That
them
was
to the
another-
council.
Well, if you get 10, 15 volunteers, it's gonna take you 30 minutes to blow up.
Additional sources.
I did 1,000 balloons when I ran, and it took my team 3 hours to blow up 1,000 balloons.
This isn't like blowing them up.
Yeah.
How many were on your team?
1,000.
Yeah, 1,000. You know, off and on, we had anywhere from, 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 people,
Well,
they came.
there's 8 of us.
Right. The other thing is, do we want to invite city staff to walk with us? Do we want to make this a team affair, if any? Like if
Do they have to get overtime?
oh, no, it would be just because they wanted to walk in the parade. I hate it when that happens, but maybe the wellness committee would want to walk. That's just.
Personally, I don't have a problem if they'd like to. I don't want to require it.
Oh, no, I would never
If
require
they
it.
want to walk, great, come on along. The more the merrier. It's the city of Port Arthur.
I'll drive the truck.
Magic.
We should make you foot pedal the truck or something.
You guys have a truck in there?
I think we could find a lightweight net to put over the back of the truck that would, as we
I
load them
wouldn't
in.
volunteer a bus if, a small bus, if you don't have.
Could you get 1,000 balloons in a bus?
Yes.
Open up the.
But that's gonna say
wheelchair.
it's at Transit versus the city of Port Arthur.
Yeah, I mean, that, obviously, I
Yeah.
can't take the name off of it,
The easiest
but it's a big box.
thing to buy with is lightweight carbon nets, and then just build out PVC, like 3 PVC with 45.
It's a good idea.
It holds that up, balloons are contained.
It's a good idea.
So we can do that. So we can do a netting over the thing, and then there's somebody in the back that's super single or.
So how much are we contributing to this effort?
I haven't got it added up yet.
I'm sure we're good for it.
Yeah.
Well, the council is paying for this. Did you get that word? Did you get that memo?
Yeah.
The other thing
Now, we want to show off our nice shiny.
and we get to set up in the lighthouse parking lot. We don't have to go up the hill. I've talked to the Saints Car Club, who normally accumulate their cars at Lighthouse,
Okay.
and they're going to save a place for our truck, because we don't want to
Working
do.
on every angle.
All right.
Don't we close off Bay Street and Boulevard?
Okay, Scott's got one more thing.
Don't we
Are we
own
done with
Bay
balloons?
Street all the way up to Gorst?
Yes, we're not going to have a problem parking a truck in the middle of Bay Street on June 25th. I don't think.
So I wanted to talk about posting committee agendas online and talking about what that would look like. We don't have to actually talk about it tonight, but maybe just get it on our radar, maybe at the next work study, to talk about perhaps certain committees have their agendas posted online and what that would look like and what goals that would support in terms of transparency and access and communication. That's all I'm going to kick out, unless you are prepared to talk about it now.
I don't want to talk about it now.
Fair enough. Okay.
All right.
Did you want to, we don't have a land use committee, do we?
Oh, yeah.
We do not, you guys need to get your calendars together and figure out a new meeting date.
Right.
How about next Wednesday?
Tomorrow.
Yeah, 2 o'clock.
You know, what I would recommend, this 7:30 in the morning, the night after the council meeting is not a good meeting. My thoughts, it's your meeting.
I don't care, I'm not like this, whatever. It's not like I'm sleeping in on Wednesday
Well,
morning.
do you want to slip it a week, or?
That's-
Look, you should do it the week where there's no meetings.
And invite all your kids to walk.
Yes.
We'd not be able to do it on the 25th, but
Okay.
You will see some of these.